Catherine, what is it in particular? I mean, I understand that we've been mainly talking about issues you raised for the Democratic Town Conference. But what is it specifically that holds your interest? What do you work?
Well, I work on probably what I used to think was one of the most undemocratic topics of all. I'm writing a book about methodological disputes in German classical scholarship in the second half of the 18th century.
Yeah, that doesn't sound terribly promising in terms of democracy.
When I was a graduate student, we were told to practice what we would say in 2 sentences to someone in the lift if we wanted to impress them about our research. And I live with someone who worked on late Soviet-era rock music, and so she would say I work on the Russian Bob Dylan, and I've never found anything as good as that to say. Why I find this period interesting is because actually it's then that classical scholarship took a different form, and it became the study of the ancient world.
So what was it before?
Well, there were various arguments as to why one should study the classics. I suppose the main arguments were to do with the importance of developing a good style in terms of how one spoke and wrote.
I said it's a training for rhetoric.
Yeah.
And that goes all the way back to the ancient world as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's revived in the Renaissance, really. This view of the importance of the classical education, but it definitely takes off from people like Quintilian and Cicero again. Again, we've got, I think, an earlier period where people are receiving the classics much more in the terms set up by ancient writers themselves. Another good reason to study classics in the early modern period is because it provides a set of examples of how to act politically and ethically. So this idea of history, and specifically ancient history, as a guide to life. Again, something that comes from Cicero, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, Plutarch, and so on. And of course that affects the text people read, because Plutarch was very, very popular during this period, much less popular now. Well, partly that's to do with changing conceptions of what classics is about.
Interesting.
So what happened to me? Well, I studied as an undergraduate here in Oxford, and what attracted me about classics was not so much the study of ancient Greece and Rome, as the fact that it was the multidisciplinary study of one culture. I really liked that idea of combining archaeology, art history, literature, philosophy,
it's all one
language.
package.
Yeah, and trying to get a hold on a culture, because I really like trying to understand human cultures. I suppose that's what really gets me. So I came here, I studied all of those things, I was very happy. I decided I wanted to use that as a toolkit to really understand the modern world more. And then I discovered that this view of classics as the multidisciplinary study of one culture seen as a whole was actually a product, I think, of the 18th century.
I see, okay, that's very interesting.
And yet it's still the view of classics as a discipline that we all work within and we appeal to today. Maybe not everyone, but it's still a very predominant view. It's still what classics are.
And it's interesting to kind of locate that in a historical context.
Yeah. So I was interested in how did this develop? Why did it happen? What consequences has it had? And what were the alternatives on the table? Could it have turned out any differently?
So if you were to give your answer, thinking in terms of, again, being in a lift with somebody, can you tell us how it took place, or perhaps more specifically why it took place at this particular time and in this particular culture?
I'd like to just say read my book.
Well, you can do that as well. We'll plug the book. We'll have an image of the book if you have one. We can stick that up on the website.
Okay, cool. I'm not at that stage yet.
Can we have a one-liner?
Gosh, you see, I'm no good at these speeches. The trouble is that there are various answers that can be given to the question. I'm sorry. I said that one thing classicists do is complicate things, don't they? There's a kind of... people have seen Germany as really, really important to this development, as developing a new kind of approach to classical studies. And in particular, there was a university reform in Germany and the foundation of a new university in Berlin in 1810.
Okay.
And that was very important because in this new university, what was then called the philosophy faculty, where the arts disciplines, the humanities was given a new prominence.
Okay.
In the older universities, it was the professional faculties, law, theology and medicine, that were the most important faculties. And when the arts faculty was established, that meant that not only the humanities but also the natural sciences began to have more stature and more respect. And at that point, classical studies also became very important as one of those disciplines. And there were various political figures who were very, very interested in it. And there were various very canny classicists around.
Yeah. Tapping into the kind of the new
Exactly.
Yeah.
But of course, the other thing that was going on in the 18th century was there was a lot more classics coming to light because there were archaeological excavations, there was the beginnings of some decipherment of papyri. Greece was opening up, it was possible to travel to Greece in a way it hadn't been for several centuries.
Suddenly the classical world was everywhere you look.
Yeah, lots and lots of new material coming to light. And of course, broader sort of cultural interest in that, so the building of neoclassical buildings, the development of neoclassical literature and so on. So it's part of a sort of broader move and interest in Greece and Rome. But what I think is that a lot of the stuff that came to light wasn't really classical then, because it was new.
Right, that's interesting.
Just in the way in which new texts that come up on papyrus today, they may not be classical because they haven't become part of our established set of expectations of what classics are about.
Yeah.
It's another way in which classics actually changes over the centuries. People often don't think that. They think of classics as something that's stayed the same, you know, from the end of antiquity, whenever we locate that, to the 21st century. But it's always changing.
Right, and the material itself is changing, as you suggested, with archaeological finds and papyri, but also, I think what you're saying is the way people are approaching it changes too.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a moving target.
Yeah, it is. It is. I guess that's true for history as well. I guess it's true for a lot of humanities subjects. The questions people ask in the natural sciences also change over time as well. But I guess the social world is so much more changing than the physical world. But yeah, I think with classics we can really see it because there's a very distinct sense of what classics is about. It's about what, you know, the world before about 500 BC, the ancient Mediterranean world. Actually, what happened between the 18th century and the 19th century is people's sense of what classics was about narrowed, so it became focused very, very narrowly on Greece and Rome.
Right.
Why was that?
Yeah, and not Egypt. Although, of course, now, some of the new strands of classic is precisely reaching out to Egyptology, to the Near East in particular.
Exactly, so we're seeing a sort of broadening of the angle of vision again.
Constantly questioning what we mean by classics, what we mean by the ancient world.
Yeah. And I guess that links back to this idea of what classicists can do in terms of contributing to broader cultural debates. Because people talk about the classics in all kinds of different ways, and some ways in which people talk about them, I think, are quite dubious. Yeah. As I've already said, if we think about ancient Greece as somehow conferring legitimacy on modern democracy, that's too quick.
Yeah.
The link from ancient Greece to modern democracy is much, much more complicated than that. And I suppose classicists have to reflect on the history of their own discipline, but they can also contribute to, you know, raising alternative ways of thinking about the past and the present.
Catherine, it's been an absolute pleasure. Many thanks.
Thank you.